Yeah, well, first of all, thanks a lot for Solidarity for inviting me to speak. I think it's a very good meeting, a very good time to have this meeting. I think it's a very good example, to get people from different left groups to discuss perspectives, potential debates, and I think hopefully a healthy discussion on one of the most exciting processes of change so far in the 21st century, which I think definitely warrants close attention and looking at it with all of its contradictions and limitations. Or just before I start, I'll point out that people want to find out more. There is the Australia-Venezuela Solidarity Network just had a Solidarity Brigade to Venezuela in the lead up to and during the elections, including attending the historic 3 million strong demonstration for Chavez's re-election in Caracas, which was the largest demonstration in Venezuela's history. And I think that fact alone, achieved 14 years into a government with a very prolonged and unresolved struggle for power, says something about the depths of this process and just how deep it's gone. They're going to actually be speaking next Tuesday at 6 p.m. To people who participate in that brigade, Pip Hinman and Kathy Ito, an Indigenous activist at the Resistance Centre in Mountain Street in Ultimo. Also encourage people to read Fred Fuentes' article in this week's Green Left, which delves a lot more into some of the history than I'll have a chance to do, and that will give background perhaps to some of my perspectives. The context in which we're discussing this really is a context in which there are governments or processes to varying degrees and varying depths in Latin America that are pushing an alternative to neoliberalism and its imperialist backers. And there are examples coming out of Latin America, not just of rhetoric, but of actual policies and gains, however limited and contradictory that they are, that show the potential for an alternative. In a context where not just neoliberalism, but the capitalist system itself is in a very deep crisis, is in chaos, and cannot even meet the needs of ordinary people, even in the most advanced capitalist countries, let alone the daily social disaster that is life for most people in the global south, intersecting which you have obviously the crises of war, and we've just seen the crises of climate change, in which this system is pushing against the very limits of the planet to actually sustain human life. I think that's the background really to discussing what is a very interesting mass process that is raising questions about, is it possible to create a socialism of the 21st century, as they say in Venezuela, and a process that has already won, I think, quite some very important progressive gains, and has actually driven in Venezuela capital back in key areas. And that this goal has been, I think that, sorry. One of the things about this, I think, on the one hand, you can see, and no doubt there'll be a lot of discussion about the very obvious limitations and huge contradictions inside the Venezuelan process. One thing anyone who looks at it can see is that there are very, very large blocks to further radical advance at the moment within Venezuela. And there are very key forces that exist, not just external to the revolution, that is imperialism and its local allies in the Venezuelan capitalist class, which remain quite a serious threat, but even within. But we also have to admit that the process has gotten this far, despite the fact that this has always been true. It has actually managed to survive not 14 years, and along the process radicalise and deliver gains to the Venezuelan people that I suspect many, and probably myself included, would have said would be impossible over a 14-year period without a much deeper rupture with a capitalist state and a capitalist system. And yet here we are 14 years in, not just with that mobilisation that I mentioned, but we have a Venezuelan national budget in the context of global economic crisis that will grow by 43% to $16 billion. And 40% of the budget of which is allocated to social spending and represents increases in social spending, in housing of 88%, which is badly needed. And in fact, housing is something of a microcosm of the Venezuelan revolution because it's bound up with so many other questions. You cannot solve the housing. The need to solve the housing question, which has been talked about in Venezuela with only some gains and much frustrations, is now beginning to be seriously dealt with in Venezuela, but it cannot be dealt with unless they can get access to building materials. They cannot get access to building materials without much greater control over wider sections of the economy. And in fact, this is dictating the fact that in Venezuela, something that went under the breach a bit, not even many people on the left noticed it, that last year in Venezuela, The Economist magazine pointed out, they nationalised 400 companies. You actually saw quite, it wasn't the big dramatic battles of the past, but it was a conscious effort to draw more of the economy in. At the same time, if you look at any of the debates that are going on about workers' control in Venezuela, which are very, very heated and very, very key, they are hooked on this question. Because the workers in industry, this is not a debate that happens just because people in abstract think workers' control is a nice idea, and I think it's a nice idea in all senses, it breaks down alienation, all the rest of it. It's being driven practically. It's been driven by the practical need to take, not just to nationalise a company, but take it out of the hands of the state bureaucrats who only want to sell building materials and raw materials needed to solve the housing crisis to multinationals for cheap deals. The workers who are fighting for workers' control are against that. They say, well, and not just them, so is the official policy of the Venezuelan government. And the workers say the only way to implement Planned Socialist Guyana, which was drawn up by elected workers' roundtables, in 2008 and 2009, the industrial heartland of Venezuela in Guyana, and then endorsed by Chavez at a meeting in which he was hailed by the workers and he told all the bureaucrats sitting in that meeting, the ministers, you have to do this now. Of course, that doesn't happen because he says that. Then there's a huge battle with many setbacks. But a key part of that is no more deals like this with multinational corporations where you sell them raw material cheaply. Now that cuts right in to the bureaucratic privileges and even the trade union bureaucrats who want to be the ones to sign deals. It cuts across all of that. That's the essence of the battle, that's the material basis of the battle. And the workers involved are saying we need to do this so we can implement the goal of the government. And the goal of the government is to solve housing. And unless we get control of these industries, we cannot deliver the materials. We cannot deliver the materials to solve this. So that goal in the government of an 88% increase in social spending in a context where they've set about 2 million houses and have already made quite impressive gains, I believe, is actually, that's part of the root crux of the radicalisation. But it's also, not just that, it's an increase of nearly 46% in healthcare, 45% in social security, science and technology 27%, culture 24%, education 21%. And this is on top of the past gains. And we've been following Venezuela. You could have had a talk last year, people have said there's been a very impressive increase in social spending in these areas. This is, the new budget is increasing even further. So we have a situation where 14 years on, and I think even despite the fact that it's facing enormous challenges, sometimes I think the international left writing of it is one-sided. It raises things that absolutely have to be raised, which are this process is being racked by bureaucracy, and it's been racked by corruption, all of those things. But that's all there was. If there wasn't also the ongoing involvement of the masses through the communal councils and through the missions, if they had not, over the last 2 years, begun to reverse the degeneration of the missions, if they had not begun by getting greater control over food production and distribution networks through nationalisations, I don't think you would have seen 3 million people march for Chavez, and Chavez won with a vote that numerically was the highest vote Chavez has even got. The fact that the opposition got their highest vote also shows the extent of the contradictions and challenges that they face. But the fact that Chavez still got the highest vote that he ever got would be impossible unless that was also a factor. And I think sometimes that factor gets written out. And I would actually want to quote, because I think it's a very, very good summary, Richard Seymour, who is a member of the Socialist Workers' Party in Britain, and he blogs at Lenin's tomb. He says about Venezuela 14 years on that it defies our expectations. Who would have thought a politician elected on a third-way ticket with a degree of ruling class support would turn into the mortal enemy of US imperialism and the Venezuelan ruling class? Who could have anticipated that an agenda of constitutional change, none of it terribly radical on the surface, become a kind of political manifesto, a program of action in the hands of mobilised masses aiming to make good this promise of equality, participatory democracy and human rights. And then when the capitalist class lash out, he goes on to say, causing a crisis of the state and proving to the Chavez government had to be a class struggle a class struggle government to a degree, mobilising its popular support against the elite. And who would have thought that this radical left government would still be in power, still going strong, still not hitting a brick wall in terms of delivering reforms?
That's 2 minutes.
Thanks. In terms of the challenges that it's faced, one of the things that I think has to be understood is that the weight of the bureaucracy and the weight of the endogenous right, which is, let's face it, we can look at the state of something like the PSUV, a mass party with millions of members. It quite clearly has not been what Chavez said it should be when he called for it to be formed in 2007. It's an electoral machine. The question, I think, though, is very easy to simply say, you need to get rid of the bureaucrats. There's something that has to be understood about how the struggle against these bureaucrats has any chance of unfolding. And it is through the program that is currently being debated across Venezuela that Chavez was actually elected on a draft program. When he was elected as a draft program for the next 6 years of government for a transition to socialism. People can read the full document on links, International Journal of Socialist Renewal. The whole document has now been translated into English, but there's also a much briefer summary of it on Venezuela analysis with Tamara Pearson. It looked at the five areas of this document. Defend, expand and consolidate the most treasured aspects. Continue to build Bolivarian socialism in the 21st century and against the savage destructive capitalist system. Turn Venezuela into a social, economic, political power as part of Latin America, multi-power world, and preserve the planet to save the human species. Now, the most decisive of these are really the first two. National sovereignty. National sovereignty in this is explained not simply by borders or anything like that, or even simply state control of the oil industry and key sectors of the economy, but the need to transform this to popular control. And through various experiments, some of which have had various experiments with varying degrees of success, of basically how do you socialise this stuff. And also the question of food sovereignty, which is a very big question of sovereignty. They import most of their food, even though they can actually grow. Now, this is bound up with the goal of eradicating the large landholders, of which there have been quite a number of gains, even though you can say they haven't completed it. It's bound up with that. Then the question of Bolivarian socialism is explained explicitly in the need to create a new revolutionary state and new forms of democratic control over the productive process. Now, the key thing about this is this cannot occur. This is a program that just 8 million people just voted for and is about to be discussed, or is being discussed, through public communities all throughout Venezuela for the National Assembly to accept amendments and the rest of it and then vote on. Now, how's it going to happen? It's not going to happen because Chavez makes a speech. Either the mass of the oppressed of Venezuela find a way to enforce their will and carry that out. And that has been the case with every single gain the revolution has made. It has only occurred if the power of the people has been organised to such a degree that they have been able to force it. They've been able to force it and make it a reality. Right? It will not be through any other program. It will not be through any other movement. I can imagine a better movement than this Chavista movement that doesn't centre around a figure like Chavez, that doesn't have the bureaucracy, all the rest of it. But it's not going to come into being. We can't just wish that into being. It is through this movement that exists and its own internal contradictions and the struggle to actually solve the problem of underdevelopment, solve the problem of food sovereignty, solve the problem of housing, solve all of these problems that the working people of Venezuela will confront the bureaucracy. And they'll do so saying, this is the program that we elected, this is the program of the government. And they will do so despite all of his limitations and contradictions, which Chavez at every point so far has encouraged this. We know, you can point to 1,000 contradictions day in, day out, but overall you have to say he has encouraged this, he has encouraged it. That's the framework, and that's the framework in which to discuss my last point. The question of independence. Because really, what does the question of independence mean? The question of, do you organise independent? Depends what you mean. I think what you don't organise independent of is that program, which is perfectly fine. Whether or not how you relate to the PSUV, how you relate to any of those things, that's all tactical. That's all revolutionaries on the ground can figure that out. But you're not independent of this movement and of this program, which at the moment has the imprinter of the government. If the government doesn't follow through, it's the government's contradiction. But also, these things will only be won to the extent by which around that program, which is the one the masses are looking at, militants find a way to strengthen the power from below, because otherwise the bureaucrats, power hates a vacuum, as Trotsky said, the bureaucrats will hold the power until it can be taken from them. But overall, This is incredible after 14 years. The very fact, however pessimistic or optimistic we might be, the very fact that this is even posed is very exciting going into the 21st century. Thanks.